the Packard 51650. Merlin makes a specific sound at 2,800 RPM in a shallow dive. Not the Hollywood roar, a layered mechanical scream that starts high, drops into a grinding howl, then smooths into something almost musical as the propeller tips break the sound barrier. By September 1952, every anti-aircraft gunner in the Sinanju-Pyongyang corridor could identify that sound 2 minutes before visual contact. Senior Sergeant Kim Tai-wan heard it first on September 22nd. He was standing in a camouflaged 37mm gun pit 300 meters north of the rail junction at Kujang-dong, drinking tea that tasted like burnt rice when the sound came rolling down the valley from the south. Not one engine, 8. The tea went into the dirt. Kim hit the alarm gong twice with his fist. 60 seconds later, 17 gun crews were at their stations across a 5-kilometer stretch of track. They'd done this 147 times since June. The Americans came almost every morning when the weather cleared. Same altitude, same approach vector, same targets. Communist railway defense doctrine in Korea wasn't sophisticated, it was repetitive. Soviet advisors had studied American interdiction patterns for 18 months and concluded the 5th Air Force operated on predictable schedules. Fighter bombers worked in elements of 4 to 8 aircraft. They preferred visual attacks between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m., when morning haze burned off but afternoon thermals hadn't started. They hit rolling stock first, locomotives second, track infrastructure last. And they always made multiple passes. The gun crews knew this. The Americans apparently didn't know they knew. Kim's battery commander, a Chinese People's Volunteer Army lieutenant named Zhao, had fought in Manchuria against the nationalists. He'd told Kim the same thing 11 times. Americans waste ammunition on first pass. They expect you to run. If you don't run, if you track them through the entire attack and fire on the climb-out when they're slow and predictable, you hit them. Zhao's battery had damaged 9 American aircraft since July, shot down 0, but damaged 9. The sound grew louder. Kim checked his gun's traverse. The 37mm M1939 had 360-degree rotation and could elevate to 85 degrees. Soviet-designed, Chinese-manufactured, delivered to North Korea in crates with Cyrillic stencils still visible under hastily applied Korean markings. The ammunition was mixed, high explosive and armor-piercing in alternating belts. The armor-piercing rounds were useless against aircraft, but nobody had bothered to sort them out. Through the camouflage netting, Kim could see the valley. The rail line ran north-south, hemmed by hills on both sides. Maximum width, 800 meters. The Americans would come in low, following the tracks, using the terrain to mask their approach from early warning posts. Standard tactical aviation thinking. Use the ground. Own the surprise. Except there was no surprise anymore. Not after 6 months of this. The sound shifted, lower now, closer. Kim's loader, a teenager from Hamhung, whose name nobody remembered, was shaking. First combat. Kim didn't tell him the statistics, that they'd fired 1683 rounds since July and hit 9 aircraft. The math wasn't encouraging, but they'd learned the sound, and they'd learned when to shoot. The 67th Tactical Bombardment Squadron wasn't supposed to be hunting trains. They'd spent August 1952 dropping napalm on Chinese infantry positions along the MLR, the main line of resistance that had barely moved in 14 months. Close air support, danger-close missions where you coordinated with forward air controllers who could see your ordnance hit from their foxholes. Immediate, visible, satisfying work. Then 5th Air Force ran the numbers. Communist supply lines in North Korea moved 4,200 tons of material south every night. Ammunition, food, fuel, replacement troops. All of it came by rail from Manchuria, through a network that funneled into 3 main corridors. The eastern corridor was too heavily defended. The western corridor ran too close to Chinese airfields. But the central corridor, Sinanju south through Pyongyang to the front, that was targetable. The problem was capacity. 5th Air Force had been hitting the Central Rail Network since 1951. They'd destroyed bridges, cratered marshalling yards, strafed rolling stock. The Communists kept running trains. Every bridge got a bypass, every crater got filled, every destroyed locomotive got replaced from reserves the Chinese were pulling out of Manchuria faster than American intelligence could count them. Major General Frank Everest, commanding 5th Air Force, wanted the trains stopped, not damaged, stopped. He told his operations staff to calculate what that would take. The answer was depressing. To interdict 4,200 tons per night, you needed to destroy approximately 60 locomotives per week. Not damage, destroy. A damaged locomotive could be repaired in 3 days at a forward workshop. A destroyed locomotive had to be replaced from strategic reserves, which took 2 weeks minimum. Do that math across a month, and you could actually reduce communist supply capacity below what their frontline units needed to sustain offensive operations. 60 locomotives per week meant 9 per day, every day, weather permitting. 5th Air Force didn't have 9 locomotives worth of confirmed kills on most days. They had claims. Pilots reported locomotive destruction regularly, but gun camera footage told a different story. Pilots saw steam and smoke and assumed catastrophic damage. What they actually hit was boiler plating, which looked dramatic but could be patched. The communist railway troops had become expert at rapid locomotive repair. They could swap a damaged boiler in 48 hours. So Everest changed the mission. Close air support got pushed to Marine aviation and Navy carrier strikes. 5th Air Force fighter bombers got pulled off the MLR and reassigned to railway interdiction, full-time, with specific emphasis on confirmed locomotive kills, not probable damage. The 67th TBS got the word on September 1st. Their squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel William Wisner, a World War II ace with 15.5 confirmed kills in Europe, called it train hunting season. The pilots called it something less printable. Trains didn't shoot back like infantry positions did, but the railway corridors were defended by concentrated anti-aircraft artillery that had been sitting in fixed positions for months, zeroed in on every approach vector, waiting. 5th Air Force intelligence estimated the Sinanju-Pyongyang corridor had 247 anti-aircraft guns. The actual number was higher. Chinese railway defense doctrine placed one AAA battery every 3 kilometers. A battery was 4 to 6 guns. The corridor was 60 kilometers long. Work it out. But the trains were there. Reconnaissance photographs from September 15th showed 19 locomotives moving south through Kujang-dong in a single 12-hour period. 19. That was more than 2 days' worth of the destruction quota in one target area. Captain Harold Fisher drew the mission on September 22nd, 8 aircraft, F-51D Mustangs. The designation had changed from P-51 when the Air Force split from the Army, but nobody called them F-51s. They were still Mustangs. Still carried 6 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns with 1,880 rounds total. Still had hard points for bombs or rockets, though 5th Air Force preferred guns for locomotives. Bombs cratered track, which got repaired. Rockets were inaccurate. But 50 caliber API, armor-piercing incendiary, could punch through a locomotive boiler if you hit it right, and boiler destruction meant the locomotive was done. Fisher's briefing took 11 minutes. The target was a 5-kilometer section of track north of Kujang-dong, where reconnaissance had photographed multiple trains staging. The weather was forecast clear. Time on target, 9:45 a.m., which put them in the valley after morning haze burned off, but before thermal turbulence got bad. Ordnance load, full ammunition, no external stores. The plan was gun runs only, fast, low, multiple passes until the ammunition was gone or the locomotives were confirmed destroyed. Intelligence mentioned the anti-aircraft defenses. They always mentioned the defenses. The corridor was rated heavily defended, which was 5th Air Force code for people are going to shoot at you. Fisher's flight had all flown interdiction missions before. They knew what heavily defended meant. What they didn't know was how much the communist gunners had learned. Lieutenant Zhao's defensive sector covered 3 rail spurs and 1 mainline junction. By communist railway defense standards, this made him responsible for a priority target. American reconnaissance aircraft photographed his sector every 4 days. American fighter bombers attacked it every 6. He'd been in position since April. 5 months was enough time to learn things. The gun pits were dug into reverse slopes, camouflaged with living vegetation that his crews watered daily. Soviet doctrine emphasized concealment over armored protection. A hidden 37mm gun was more survivable than a fortified one because American pilots couldn't suppress what they couldn't see. Zhao's 6 guns were positioned in a loose arc covering the valley approaches from south and east. Overlapping fields of fire. No single attack run could suppress more than 2 positions simultaneously. The ammunition bunkers were separated from the gun pits by 50 meters. Another Soviet lesson from the Great Patriotic War: when an ammunition bunker took a direct hit, you wanted the gun crew to survive. Zhao's bunkers held 4,800 rounds of mixed ammunition, high explosive for aircraft, armor-piercing for locomotives if things got desperate. The armor-piercing loads were mostly useless against aircraft, but Chinese supply doctrine didn't allow ammunition exchanges. You got what they sent you. Camouflage discipline was absolute. No fires during daylight, no movement outside the pits when reconnaissance aircraft were overhead. Zhao had shot a loader in June for smoking during the day. The man's cigarette had reflected sunlight. An American photo reconnaissance shooting star had altered course to investigate. The loader died. The position stayed hidden. Zhao received a commendation. By September, his crews could track an F-51 through an entire attack run without exposing their positions. The technique was simple. Don't shoot on the dive. The American is fast, maneuvering, hard to hit. Wait for the climb out. After ordnance release, the Mustang has to gain altitude to clear the valley walls. Airspeed drops. Climb angle is predictable. Target is huge. That's when you fire. The American pilots never seemed to learn this. They'd dive, strafe, pull up, and act surprised when tracers came up during the climb. Every time. Zhao had studied the pattern. American attacks concentrated between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. They worked in elements of 4 or 8 aircraft. They made multiple passes, usually 3, sometimes 4 if the target was particularly lucrative. And they always used the same approach vectors, because the valley only offered 2 viable ingress routes, and the Americans preferred the southern approach where the terrain masked their radar signature. The predictability was gift. Zhao's crews knew where to look. They knew when to expect contact. They knew when to shoot. What they didn't know was whether it would be enough. Zhao's battery had damaged 9 American aircraft since July. Battle damage assessments confirmed hits. American aircraft returning to base with visible damage, reduced speed, trailing smoke. But damaged wasn't destroyed. The Americans kept coming. Different pilots, same aircraft, same tactics. On September 22nd, Zhao's forward observer reported engine noise at 9:38 a.m. 8 aircraft. Southern approach. Standard formation. Zhao ordered his crews to tracking stations but held fire orders. Let them come in. Let them commit to the attack run. Let them think they own the valley, then teach them otherwise. Captain Harold Fisher had flown 63 combat missions over Korea. He'd strafed truck convoys, napalmed bunker complexes, and provided close air support for Marine infantry who were close enough to wave at him. He was good at his job. The 63 missions were evidence of that in a war where the average fighter-bomber pilot completed 30 missions before getting rotated home or shot down. But train hunting was different. The briefing at K-13 Air Base had been straightforward. 8 F-51D Mustangs. Target, rail junction, north of Kujang-dong. Expected enemy activity, multiple locomotives, staging for southbound movement. Expected enemy defenses, heavy anti-aircraft artillery, mixed calibers, dug in and camouflaged. Time on target, 9:45 a.m. Weather, clear. Fisher divided his 8 aircraft into 2 flights of 4. Red flight, his element, would take the first pass from south to north, following the rail line through the valley. Blue flight would follow 30 seconds behind, hitting whatever red flight missed or suppressed. Standard tactics. Proven tactics. The ordnance load had been Fisher's decision. No bombs, no rockets, guns only. Each Mustang carried 1,880 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, 400 rounds per gun across 6 guns, minus the 200 rounds typically lost to feed mechanism failures and jams. Call it 1,680 effective rounds per aircraft. Across 8 aircraft, that gave them 13,440 rounds to work with. 5th Air Force wanted confirmed locomotive kills, gun camera footage that showed catastrophic boiler failure or structural destruction that couldn't be field repaired. Bombs could do that, but bombs were inaccurate from low altitude, and the valley was too narrow for dive bombing runs. Rockets could do it, but rockets scattered, and most of them missed. Guns were surgical. If you could hold the trigger long enough and hit the boiler in the right spot, 50 caliber API would punch through and turn the locomotive into scrap. The tactical problem was the valley itself. 5 kilometers long, 800 meters wide at the narrowest point, hemmed by hills rising 300 meters on both sides. 2 ways in, from the south following the rail line, or from the east perpendicular to the track. The southern approach gave you a longer run and better target acquisition. The eastern approach was shorter, but put you crossing the track at 90 degrees, which meant less time on target. Fisher chose the southern approach. Longer exposure to anti-aircraft fire, but better chance of confirmed kills. Intelligence had marked 17 known anti-aircraft positions in the valley. 37mm and 85mm guns, Chinese and Soviet manufacture, dug into reverse slopes with overlapping fields of fire. The intelligence officer had used the phrase heavily defended 4 times during the briefing. Fisher had stopped listening after the second time. Every target in North Korea was heavily defended by September 1952. The communists had been fortifying railway corridors for 18 months. If you only hit lightly defended targets, you'd never fly. The plan was speed and violence. Red Flight would enter the valley at 280 knots, drop to 50 feet above the rail line, and engage any locomotives with sustained fire. 2-second bursts minimum, which meant 240 rounds per gun per burst. Blue Flight would suppress anti-aircraft positions on the climb-out or hit secondary targets if Red Flight scored kills on the first pass. Then both flights would reform, reassess, and make additional passes until the ammunition was exhausted or the locomotives were confirmed destroyed. Fisher expected to make 3 passes, maybe 4. He expected to take battle damage. The question was, how much? At 9:23 a.m., Red Flight lifted off from K-13. Blue Flight followed 2 minutes later. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, 10-mile visibility, winds calm. Flying conditions didn't get better than this. 22 minutes later, Fisher's flight was over the initial point, a bend in the Chongchon River that marked the start of the attack run. He could see the valley ahead. The rail line was visible as a dark line cutting through brown hills. No visible trains yet, but reconnaissance had confirmed multiple locomotives staging in the target area. Fisher keyed his radio. 4 words. Red Flight. Going in. Kim saw them at 9:47 a.m. 4 aircraft, then 4 more. Low approach from the south, following the rail line exactly as predicted. The morning sun was behind them, which would have been a tactical advantage if Kim's gun pit hadn't been positioned on a reverse slope, where the sun didn't matter. He didn't touch the gun yet. Standing orders from Lieutenant Zhao. No movement until the Americans committed to their attack run. Any premature action would give away the gun positions. The Americans had photo reconnaissance aircraft that could spot a gun crew moving in daylight. Better to stay frozen and let them think the valley was undefended. The forward observer's voice came through the field telephone. 8 aircraft confirmed. F-51 type. Speed approximately 450 kilometers per hour. Altitude 60 meters. They're splitting into 2 elements. Kim watched through the camouflage netting. The first 4 Mustangs, Red Flight, though he didn't know that designation, were dropping even lower, 50 feet above the tracks now. He could see the gun ports in their wings, could see the pilots' heads in the canopies, could see the propeller blur and the exhaust stains on the cowlings. They were hunting. You could tell from the way they flew, nose slightly down, scanning, searching for targets. The rail junction had 3 locomotives visible from the air. 2 were positioned on the main line, 1 on the eastern spur. All 3 had steam up. The Americans would see them in approximately 12 seconds. Zhao's voice on the telephone. All batteries, track but do not fire. Repeat, track only. Kim's crew traversed the 37mm gun, following the lead Mustang's flight path. Smooth movement. No jerking. The gun's bearing race had been lubricated with Chinese axle grease that morning. It moved silently. The lead Mustang pilot saw the locomotives. Kim watched the aircraft's nose dip slightly as the pilot lined up his run. Range was closing. 900 meters, 800, 700. The Mustang's wings erupted. 6 streams of tracers, one from each 50 caliber gun, converged on the first locomotive. The sound reached Kim's position half a second later. Not the sharp crack of individual shots, but a sustained ripping noise like fabric tearing. 240 rounds in 2 seconds. The locomotive's boiler took multiple hits. Steam vented. Metal sparked. The second Mustang opened fire. Same target, another 240 rounds into the same locomotive. The boiler ruptured. Superheated steam exploded outward in a white cloud that obscured the entire rail junction for 3 seconds. The third and fourth Mustangs shifted to the second locomotive. Same technique. Sustained bursts. The boiler didn't rupture immediately, but Kim could see the hits. Bright flashes where armor-piercing incendiary rounds penetrated the plating. 4 locomotives had been visible from the air. The Americans had just destroyed 2 in 15 seconds. Then they started climbing. All 4 Mustangs pulling up simultaneously to clear the valley walls. Airspeed bleeding off as they converted speed into altitude. Climb angle approximately 35 degrees. Predictable. Vulnerable. Zhao's voice. All batteries. Fire. Kim squeezed the trigger. The 37mm gun fired in 3 round bursts. The cycling rate was 160 rounds per minute in theory, which meant 1 round every 0.375 seconds, but the gun's mechanism actually fired in clusters. 3 rounds, slight pause, 3 more rounds. 17 guns opened fire simultaneously across the valley. 37mm from Kim's battery and 5 other positions. 85mm from the heavy battery on the western ridge. The sky filled with tracers, red from the Chinese ammunition, white from the Soviet stocks. The lead Mustang took a hit. Kim didn't know if it was his gun or another crew's. The aircraft shuddered visibly. Smoke trailed from the left wing root, but it kept climbing. Cleared the ridge. Disappeared. The second Mustang wasn't touched. Neither was the third. The fourth took multiple hits. Kim saw the impacts on the fuselage and tail, but it also cleared the valley. 4 aircraft in, 4 aircraft out, 2 locomotives destroyed, battle damage to 2 American aircraft. The second element, Blue Flight, was already entering the valley. Blue Flight leader was First Lieutenant Robert Thresher. He'd watched Red Flight's attack from 2,000 feet, seen the steam explosions, seen the tracers come up during the climb-out. Now it was his turn. Thresher pushed his Mustang's nose down and followed the rail line into the valley, his wingman tucked in tight on his right. The second element, Blue 3 and Blue 4, spread slightly wider for better coverage. Standard 4-ship attack formation. The valley looked different from 50 feet. The hills seemed taller. The space seemed narrower. And there was smoke everywhere from the destroyed locomotives, thick white steam mixed with black coal smoke that obscured the rail junction. Thresher spotted movement through the smoke. A locomotive on the eastern spur, starting to move. The crew was trying to evacuate it before the Americans could engage. Too late. Thresher's gun sight centered on the locomotive's boiler, range 600 meters and closing fast at 280 knots. He waited until 400 meters, then squeezed the trigger. The Mustang shuddered as all 6 guns fired. Tracers walked up the railbed across the locomotive's cowcatcher into the boiler. The 50 caliber API rounds, armor-piercing incendiary, were designed to penetrate aircraft armor and ignite fuel tanks. Against a locomotive boiler, they punched through the plating and into the pressurized water chamber inside. Each penetration created a failure point. Enough failure points and the boiler couldn't maintain pressure. Catastrophic failure followed. Thresher held the trigger for 3 seconds. 360 rounds. The locomotive's boiler split open. Steam erupted vertically in a column that rose 50 meters. The locomotive stopped moving, His wingmen hit the same target with another burst. Overkill, but 5th Air Force wanted confirmed destruction, not probable damage. Blue 3 and Blue 4 engaged a 4th locomotive that was partially hidden behind an ammunition car. The locomotive was stationary, steam up, crew visible in the cab. They never had a chance to move. Both Mustangs fired simultaneously. The locomotive disappeared in a cloud of steam and flying metal. 4 locomotives destroyed in 90 seconds. That was the mission quota achieved. Fisher's voice came over the radio from above the valley. Blue flight, reform and prepare for second pass. Target remaining rolling stock. Thresher pulled up. The valley walls were close. Too close. He banked right to avoid the western ridge. Felt his Mustang slow as it climbed. Airspeed dropped from 280 knots to 190. The Merlin engine strained against gravity and drag. The anti-aircraft fire was immediate. Thresher saw tracers arcing up from positions he hadn't spotted on the way in. Red tracers from 37mm guns. Larger white tracers from what had to be 85mm weapons. The communist gunners had held fire during the attack run and opened up during the climb when the Mustangs were slow and predictable. Something hit Thresher's aircraft. He felt it more than heard it, a sharp impact somewhere aft of the cockpit. The Mustang yawed left. He corrected with rudder, but the aircraft felt wrong, sluggish. He checked his instruments. Oil pressure dropping. Coolant temperature rising. Hydraulic pressure fluctuating. Another impact. This one he heard. Metal tearing. The canopy frame starred where shrapnel punched through. Thresher's right arm went numb. He looked down. Blood on his flight suit. Not arterial bleeding, but enough to be a problem. He keyed the radio. Blue 1 taking hits. Climbing out. His wingman's voice. Blue 2 right behind you. You're trailing smoke. Thresher fought the Mustang over the ridge. The oil pressure gauge was dropping fast now. The Merlin could run without oil for maybe 3 minutes before it seized. Maybe less if the damage was severe. He needed altitude and distance from the valley. K-13 Airbase was 70 kilometers south. He might make it, might not. Below him, the remaining 6 Mustangs from red and blue flights were reforming for their second pass. The rail junction was obscured by steam and smoke. 4 locomotives confirmed destroyed. Intelligence had said there were probably 6 in the target area. That meant 2 more were hidden somewhere in the smoke. Fisher's voice on the radio. All aircraft. Second pass. Target opportunity. Multiple rail cars spotted north of the junction. Engage at will. The Mustangs dove back into the valley. The anti-aircraft fire intensified. Kim's gun crew and 16 other batteries tracked them down. Waited for the climb out. Fired when the targets were slowest and most vulnerable. 2 more Mustangs took battle damage on the second pass. One lost his coolant system entirely and had to make an emergency landing at a forward strip. But they destroyed 3 more locomotives that had been hidden under camouflage netting and obliterated 47 rail cars loaded with ammunition and supplies. Third pass. The ammunition situation was getting critical. Most aircraft were down to less than 400 rounds remaining, but there were targets everywhere. Rolling stock, railway infrastructure, suspected ammunition dumps. Fisher authorized the third pass. This time, the communist gunners were ready from the start. They fired during the dive, during the attack run, during the climb out. Continuous fire from positions that seemed to multiply as the attack progressed. 6 Mustangs entered the valley. 6 came out, but 5 had visible battle damage. Fisher called it. All aircraft. Winchester. RTB. Winchester meant out of ammunition. RTB meant return to base. The mission was over. The gun camera footage took 4 hours to develop and review. Fisher sat in the debriefing room at K-13 while intelligence officers ran the film through hand-cranked viewers, marking timestamps, counting impacts, assessing damage. The count started with locomotives. Frame-by-frame analysis showed 9 separate locomotive destructions. Not damage, destruction. Boilers ruptured, fireboxes collapsed, frames bent beyond field repair. 3 on the first pass, 4 on the second, 2 more on the third when Blue 3 found a pair of locomotives hidden under camouflage netting north of the junction. 9 locomotives destroyed in one mission. That was the entire daily quota for 5th Air Force's interdiction campaign. 1 squadron, 1 valley, 1 morning. The intelligence officer marking the footage was a captain named Hendricks who'd been analyzing gun camera film since 1951. He knew what catastrophic locomotive damage looked like versus what could be repaired. He marked each destroyed locomotive with a red grease pencil on the assessment sheet. 9 red marks. Rolling stock was harder to count. The footage showed sustained fire into railcars, but determining whether a railcar was destroyed or merely damaged required seeing secondary explosions or structural collapse. Hendricks counted 47 railcars with confirmed destruction, ammunition cars that detonated, fuel cars that burned, equipment cars that collapsed. Another 93 were marked probably destroyed, which meant visible damage but no confirmation of complete loss. Fisher didn't care about the probables. 5th Air Force wanted confirmed kills. The 9 locomotives were confirmed. The 47 rail cars were confirmed. Everything else was statistical noise. But the cost was real. 8 aircraft had entered the valley. 8 had returned. But 6 showed battle damage ranging from minor to severe. Thresher's Mustang had landed at K-13 with 42 holes in the airframe, a seized oil pump, and a ruptured coolant line. Thresher himself had taken shrapnel in his right shoulder and couldn't fly for 2 weeks. Red 3 had landed with damage to his tail section that made the aircraft unflyable until a replacement stabilizer could be installed. Blue 4 had hydraulic damage that required a complete system rebuild. 3 other aircraft had minor damage: punctured fuel tanks, damaged control surfaces, instrument failures. The maintenance officer estimated 340 man-hours of repair work across the 6 damaged aircraft. 2 would be down for at least a week. The rest could be patched and returned to service within 72 hours. Squadron cost accounting worked differently than most people understood. The 67th TBS had 24 assigned aircraft. On any given day, 6 were down for maintenance. That left 18 flyable. The mission had used 8 aircraft and put 6 into extended maintenance. Net result, the squadron's operational availability dropped from 18 aircraft to 14 for at least 4 days. Was 9 locomotives worth that cost? 5th Air Force said yes. The numbers supported it. Destroying 9 locomotives in one mission meant the squadron had achieved in one sortie what typically took an entire week of operations. The efficiency was undeniable. But efficiency wasn't the same as sustainability. If every mission resulted in 75% battle damage rates, the squadron would run out of flyable aircraft within 3 weeks. The communists didn't need to shoot down American aircraft. They just needed to damage them faster than maintenance could repair them. Hendricks finished his assessment and handed Fisher the damage report. 9 locomotives confirmed destroyed. 47 rail cars confirmed destroyed. 6 aircraft battle damaged. 1 pilot wounded. Total ordnance expended: 10,560 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition across all 3 passes. Fisher did the math. 10,560 rounds divided by 9 locomotives meant 1,173 rounds per confirmed locomotive kill. That was actually efficient by interdiction standards. Most locomotive kills required 2,000 plus rounds because pilots fired at everything and only hit a fraction of their targets. The intelligence assessment went up the chain to 5th Air Force headquarters. By 6 p.m. on September 22nd, Major General Everest's staff had the numbers. The 67th TBS mission was classified as a major success. 9 confirmed locomotive kills, significant rolling stock destruction, acceptable aircraft losses. The mission report used the word acceptable 3 times. Lieutenant Zhao's after-action report took 30 minutes to write. Chinese People's Volunteer Army doctrine required detailed accounting after every engagement. Rounds expended, hits observed, enemy losses claimed, friendly casualties sustained. His battery had fired 847 rounds of 37mm ammunition across the 3 American passes. High explosive and armor-piercing mixed, because that's what the ammunition bunkers contained. The armor-piercing rounds were useless against aircraft, but the loaders fed belts in the order they were stacked, and nobody had time to sort ammunition during combat. Hits observed, 17. Zhao was conservative with this number. He only counted impacts his crews had personally witnessed, tracers connecting with aircraft, visible damage, smoke trails. Other batteries were claiming 30-plus hits, but Zhao didn't trust their counting methodology. Enemy aircraft shot down, 0. This was the number that mattered to Chinese Railway Defense Command. Damaged aircraft could return to base and fly again. Only destroyed aircraft reduced American operational capability. Zhao's battery had damaged aircraft. It hadn't destroyed any. American ordnance impacts in his defensive sector, 4. 2 near misses from strafing runs that cratered the access road to Gun Pit 3. 1 direct hit on an ammunition bunker that was empty because Zhao had relocated the ammunition 2 days earlier based on a hunch about American targeting. 1 hit on the camouflage netting over Gun Pit 5 that did no damage but would require the netting to be replaced. Friendly casualties, 1 dead, 3 wounded. The dead man was a loader in Gun Pit 2, who'd exposed himself above ground level to pass ammunition during the second American pass. A .50 caliber round hit him in the chest. He was dead before the gun crew could pull him back into the pit. The wounded were minor, shrapnel injuries from near misses, 1 broken arm from a crew member who'd fallen during the third engagement. Locomotives destroyed in Zhao's defensive sector, 9. This number stung. Zhao's mission was to protect the rail network. 9 locomotives destroyed meant mission failure by any objective standard. The fact that his guns had damaged American aircraft was tactically irrelevant if the Americans had destroyed their targets. But Chinese railway defense doctrine didn't evaluate success based on locomotives saved. It evaluated based on American aircraft destroyed versus ammunition expended. Zhao's battery had fired 847 rounds and damaged 17 aircraft without losing a single gun position. By that metric, the engagement was successful. The broader numbers told a different story. 17 anti-aircraft batteries had engaged the American aircraft across 3 passes. Total rounds fired, 4,420. The number came from the consolidated ammunition reports that each battery submitted to Railway Defense Command. Total American aircraft shot down, 0. Total American aircraft damaged, 6 confirmed. Possibly 8. 4,420 rounds to damage 6 aircraft worked out to 736 rounds per damaged aircraft. Soviet anti-aircraft doctrine considered 200 rounds per hit to be acceptable performance. 736 rounds per hit was terrible performance by any standard. But the Americans had lost 9 locomotives. Railway Defense Command's morning intelligence brief had identified 12 locomotives in the Kujang-dong area. 9 destroyed meant 75% losses. The remaining 3 locomotives had evacuated during the attack and were hidden in tunnel positions 5 kilometers north. The replacement timeline was 2 weeks. Chinese railway logistics could move locomotives from Manchurian reserves to forward positions in 14 days if the Americans didn't interdict the replacement trains, which they would. Which meant the actual replacement timeline was 3 weeks, maybe 4. Zhao included all of this in his report. He didn't editorialize. Chinese military culture didn't reward subjective analysis. He provided numbers, observed facts, casualty counts. The assessment would happen at higher command levels. At 3 p.m., Railway Defense Command's response came back. Zhao's battery was commended for maintaining defensive fire throughout the engagement. The 1 casualty was noted. The 17 observed hits were recorded. Orders for the next day: repair damaged camouflage, redistribute ammunition, maintain defensive readiness. No mention of the 9 destroyed locomotives. No mention that 75% of the sector's rail capacity had been obliterated in 20 minutes. Success was measured in American aircraft damaged, not Chinese locomotives saved. Zhao read the commendation and filed it. His crews were already repairing the damaged netting and redistributing ammunition. By nightfall, the gun positions would be ready for the next American attack. The Americans would come back. They always did. Different pilots, same aircraft, same valley, same tactics, and Zhao's crews would fire the same way, holding during the dive, engaging during the climb-out, damaging aircraft without destroying them. The locomotives would keep dying. The guns would keep firing. The war would continue. The mission report entered 5th Air Force records as Mission 347K, flown by the 67th Tactical Bombardment Squadron on September 22, 1952. 9 locomotives destroyed, 47 rail cars destroyed, 6 aircraft damaged, 1 pilot wounded. Mission assessment, major success. Lieutenant Zhao's after-action report entered Chinese People's Volunteer Army records the same day. 4,420 rounds expended across 17 batteries, 17 hits observed, 6 American aircraft damaged, 0 American aircraft destroyed. Assessment, successful defense. Both reports were accurate. Both conclusions were defensible, and both were completely wrong about what the engagement actually meant. 5th Air Force counted locomotives. By that metric, the 67th TBS had achieved a decisive victory. 9 locomotives destroyed in one mission exceeded the daily interdiction quota and demonstrated that concentrated attacks on railway infrastructure could achieve strategic results. The mission became a template. Other squadrons received similar tasking. The railway interdiction campaign intensified. Chinese Railway Defense Command counted aircraft damage rates. By that metric, Zhao's batteries had successfully defended their sector. They'd engaged 8 American aircraft, damaged 6, and maintained defensive positions without losses. The anti-aircraft network had functioned as designed. The defenses were working. Neither side asked the relevant question: what actually changed? The destroyed locomotives were replaced in 3 weeks. Chinese railway logistics moved reserves from Manchuria through corridors the Americans couldn't effectively interdict. By mid-October, the Kujang-dong rail junction was operating at 90% of its pre-attack capacity. The 4,200 tons of supplies moving south every night dropped to 3,800 tons for 21 days, then returned to normal levels. The 6 damaged Mustangs were repaired and returned to service. Maintenance crews at K-13 worked double shifts. Replacement parts came from Japan. By October 5th, the 67th TBS was back to 18 operational aircraft. The squadron flew 16 more interdiction missions in October, destroying 34 locomotives total, losing 2 aircraft, and damaging 19 others. The war's front lines didn't move. The main line of resistance in October 1952 was within 3 kilometers of where it had been in September. Communist supply capacity was reduced, but not eliminated. American interdiction efforts continued, but couldn't stop the flow entirely. Both sides kept fighting. Neither side was winning. Fisher flew 42 more combat missions before his tour ended in December 1952. He received a Distinguished Flying Cross for the September 22nd mission. The citation mentioned the 9 locomotives and called the attack a devastating blow to enemy logistics. Fisher accepted the medal and never spoke about the mission again. Zhao's battery remained in position until the armistice in July 1953. They engaged American aircraft 273 more times. They damaged 84 aircraft. They shot down 3. They lost 11 men killed and 27 wounded. When the war ended, Zhao received a commendation from Chinese Railway Defense Command for maintaining defensive operations throughout the conflict. The commendation didn't mention how many locomotives had been destroyed in his sector. The historical record treats September 22, 1952 as a footnote. 1 mission among thousands, 9 locomotives among hundreds destroyed during the interdiction campaign. 6 damaged aircraft among thousands that took battle damage over Korea. The numbers disappear into statistical aggregates that prove nothing except that both sides could count their losses. But here's what the numbers don't answer. If the Americans destroyed 9 locomotives and the Chinese replaced them 3 weeks later, who won? If Chinese gunners damaged 6 aircraft and the Americans repaired them 2 weeks later, what changed? If both sides claimed success based on different metrics, were either of them right? The locomotives ran again. The aircraft flew again. The war continued. And neither side could explain what 20 minutes of violence in a Korean valley had actually accomplished beyond proving that destruction is temporary and counting isn't the same as understanding.